If we're storing data in the cloud, we already have to worry about regulations in our own environment. Hopefully, you have some background understanding of that from other courses. And as far as going in the cloud, we have to worry about those same regulations, and sometimes the concerns with those regulations are exacerbated in the cloud because of, again, the multi-tenancy and some of the other concerns that we've talked about, the control of that data. Um, as far as what regulations we have to look at, so in the U.S., it's a little confusing because we have sort of a hodgepodge of lots of different laws, rules, and regulations in the United States that all cover different areas and different industries. So you really have to know your industry to know what regulations you're required to comply with in your specific industry. In the EU, things are a little bit more organized. They do have laws that are a little bit more centralized. I do have to say though, in the EU, the laws on privacy are much more stringent in the EU than they are here in the US. So if you're a US based student and you're looking at this subject, it's they're a little less stringent in the US, but it's also a lot less structured, these laws and regulations. Whereas things are much more structured and well understood in the EU, but they are much more stringent in the EU. Um, and also the U.S. is really a collection of a whole bunch of state governments, which each may have their own regulations and do have their own regulations in reference to many of these industries. So that's a whole another layer you have to look at. And even in some cases to the local layer with large cities and things like that, they even have regulations. So it does get a little bit dicey. And so here's the other problem with these data privacy is think about this. If you're a U.S. based company and you're in the cloud, what are the odds that your data might be stored in the EU? And what if one of your customers happens to be based in the EU and their data is located in the EU? At that point, you have to comply with the laws in the EU, even though you're a US based company, even though you're doing business in the United States. So sometimes the cloud can blur these lines as to which jurisdiction you're operating in. So, again, something else you have to keep in mind. I can tell you that many of the cloud service providers do give you options to restrict your cloud offering or your cloud utilization to certain geographic areas. For example, when you set up your Microsoft Azure environment with your free $200 credit, they're going to basically force you into one of their geographic regions within the United States. Um, but you could, if you're paying for Azure, you can tell them that you want your data located in Seattle, or you want it in Chicago, or you want it anywhere except New Jersey, right? So you can make that determination with some of these cloud platforms, so that you can control that jurisdictional protections. So you can control which laws you have to comply with to some extent. As far as roles and responsibilities for privacy with the cloud, this is another area that gets a little bit dicey as to who's responsible for this stuff, right? So if I'm storing data to Microsoft Azure or to Amazon or to Google, who's responsible for this privacy? Is it me or is it the cloud service provider? And the answer is it depends. Um, the physical environment is the sole responsibility of the cloud provider, no matter what service model you're using. So physical environment is always their responsibility. We have no control of the physical environment. As far as the infrastructure goes, the sole responsibility of the cloud provider for platform and software, but it's a shared responsibility between us and the cloud provider. So we both have some responsibility with infrastructure. But for PaaS and SaaS, that's 100% the cloud provider. For platform security, it's the sole responsibility of the provider for SaaS, and it's a shared responsibility for us, and also for infrastructure. It's a shared responsibility. For application privacy and security, that's a shared responsibility for SaaS, and the responsibility of the cloud customer for both infrastructure and platform as a service. Data security is our responsibility as the cloud client for all models, and likewise for governance. That is 100% our responsibility for both governments and data security. And data security is probably the one that's regulated the most, right? Because it's the actual data. That's where the value is. And I wanted to show you there's a link at the bottom, and you can download that spreadsheet. I'm going to see if I can bring it up for you here in the video. This is kind of a neat spreadsheet because what it does is it's called the Cloud Controls Matrix. So what it does, if you look at the control domains down the left-hand side, these are all the different types of controls for IT security, and they're kind of classified through the group that created this spreadsheet. And then there's also a description here. But then when you scroll over, what it does is it tells you all the different laws in the United States, which ones address those concerns. So for example, governance and risk management policy for the cloud. Let's say I had to comply with HIPAA. So HIPAA is pretty common in my market. So if I scroll over to HIPAA, I hope I didn't miss it. Let me go back. Where is HIPAA? Am I missing it here? Here it is. HIPAA. It tells me that these concerns are addressed in 45 CSR 164.316A, B, B1I, B2I, and Section 308. So I could go and reference those and see how it's addressed. And it does this for all of these different areas, for all these different regulations. So it's a nice little matrix. So it gives you kind of a nice shorthand. So for example, FERPA is a law that we have to comply with in higher education. You can see there's not a lot of areas that are addressed in FERPA, but here's one right here. Let's see what this is. So FERPA does define some things as far as identity and access management and user access revocation. That is addressed in FERPA and might have some things that we have to be concerned with in the cloud. So again, I have that link here in the PowerPoint. When you download the PowerPoint source, you can certainly take a look at that.